just want to really honor this conversation. This is a big conversation. This is not a theoretical, work things out. We're going to use maps, but maps are not what we're about. We're going to use maps because it's the best tool to get to a depth of truth. But just to kind of hold this, right? I mean, we're all bodhisattvas in the room. We're all living our very narrow lives as infinite suffering takes place around us. Okay, so we're having this conversation, right, as a way to open ourselves up, to try and kind of to be in that, right, to respond to that. So I guess the first thing I want to try and say is that we want to kind of reject something. I want to offer a rejection of one notion in the classical theistic tradition. That is to say, I want to affirm the dignity of the question. And when a classical theistic tradition tells me that actually it's really something in you, there's a rejection of the dignity of the question. That is to say, if I'm unable to look at the world and say, that's bad and that's good, there's a rejection of the dignity of my judgment. And if my essential core human adequacy and dignity is rejected, if I can't make that kind of judgment, then I can't be called to heal the world. Right? Because my judgment can't be trusted in healing. We call tikkun olam, the fixing, the repair, the heal of the world. So the first thing I think we have to do is affirm the question is real. The question is real. We affirm the dignity of the question, right, by itself. Right, number one. I kind of just to start there and just to maybe share with you an original text. There's a text about, we have Ken, right, mentioned Job. Right, Job. You remember Job? Archibald MacLeish, J.B.? Okay, there's a general rule we have, by the way. Whenever I mention a literary work, just nod. Okay? It doesn't matter if you've read it or not, just lie. Okay? So let me try it again. Archibald MacLeish, J.B., remember? Right? So there's this great text, this wisdom text about Job, right, and Jethro, as in, remember Jethro? Ian Anderson, Jethro Tull, remember him?
Sure.
Okay, so he was named after Jethro, Bible guy. He's coming back at you in a second. Right? And the third person was Bilam. Bilam's ass, right? Great biblical story in the book of Numbers. And these three people are in Pharaoh's court in this mythic scene in Tractate Sota 11a. And there's this discussion about what to do about the kind of slave people who need to be destroyed. They could be Armenians, or they could be Jews, or they could be Greek Orthodox. They could be whoever you want to put into the story. And so there's three responses to Pharaoh who wants to figure out what to do with these people who are the other. Okay, so Jethro kind of protests, runs away, tries to fight, can't do anything, leaves, right? Because he can't, leaves the court, runs away, refuses to participate after this dramatic kind of argument with Pharaoh, and so he gets a good reward. He gets a good son-in-law, right? Moses. Okay, then the second person, Bilam, says, kill the bastards, right? And in a happy biblical end, he gets killed. Okay, so the third person is Job. The Talmud says, Iyov shatak v'nidon b'yisurin. It's a mantra from the Talmud. Job is silent, and because he's silent, right, he then suffers. He becomes Job. There's a book written called Job. He becomes the person who suffers. So the Zen masters, kind of the Hebrew Zen masters, say, what's a koan? What does that mean? He's silent, and he suffers. Well, why? I mean, weren't we silent? I mean, why is he silent? I mean, isn't Job a righteous man? Job is going to allow the suffering to happen. He's going to be silent? It's a kind of, I meditated on this koan for years and years and years. And until I kind of heard playing, this kind of, when Zen, practitioners meditate on koans, they get enlightenment. When Jews meditate kind of on koans, we hear Bill Cosby. Okay, so I heard this like Bill Cosby routine kind of happening after like a decade in my mind, in which kind of God, Job, Noah, right? So God, right, kind of says to Job, he says, Job, he says, why aren't you kind of why are you so quiet? Why are you so silent? And Job says, I'm silent because nothing I say is going to do anything. I can't affect the thing, right? And God says, So a year goes by, and Job starts to suffer. Okay? What does Job do when he starts to suffer? And I apologize for the impoliteness coming at you. He goes like this. Ah! He starts to scream. And God says, oh, who's that? He says, it's me, Job. He says, what are you screaming for? What do you mean, what am I screaming for? I'm suffering. And God says to him, well, when you scream, does it like make the suffering go away? Does it help? And Job says, of course not. He says, why are you screaming? He says, don't you know anything? Right? When it hurts, you scream. And God says, when it hurts, you scream, which means if you're able to be silent, it doesn't hurt. I've become so egocentric, I've become so narrow, that I can actually rationalize my silence. It actually doesn't hurt. So I live my life, and I explain to myself And actually, the reason I'm not doing anything about it is because I can't help. It's actually I'm a liar. That's the shadow, which is a lie. The reason I'm not doing anything about it is because it doesn't hurt. And so the reason we have such a hard time with this conversation is because I have to kind of open myself up that it hurts. And one of the ways to close myself is with theology. Theology is one of the great tools to deaden sensitivity to pain. Right? And theology which deadens sensitivity to pain, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Buddhist, isn't kosher. It's not kosher theology. And so I want to just invite myself, right, invite us to just kind of open ourselves up to the bigness of this. Kind of step out of kind of the intellectual listening mode, although we're going to use intellectual tools. But this is not an intellectual conversation. Okay, it's about something very deep and kind of very real.